So I'm Hugh Honisch, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to read you a chapter or two from my actually first novel in English. It's the first novel I wrote, and then I wrote all these German things, and this is come out now the day before yesterday in English. So it's very brand new. It's available as a Kindle ebook, and it's called Obsidian Secrets. And about Obsidian Secrets, the year is 1865. The place is Munich, capital of the Kingdom of Bavaria. That's under Mad King Louis, who built all the nice castles. The setting is historical, plus the addition that the mythical beasts we know from legends actually exist and are called the Fae or the She. And one of those is loose in a high-class hotel, where two young Bavarian officers and a British agent specialized on uncanny and fey crime hunt the creature, which appears every couple of hours for a short time somewhere in the hotel to wreak havoc. Their team wizard can only roughly pre-calculate its sudden appearances. And there's one person in the hotel who can feel the spectre's approach, Corisande, a young English lady with a somewhat dubious background who only came to find a husband. She's caught in the cross-current of disasters when the British agent wishes to include her in the hunt, while young and somewhat infatuated Lieutenant von Orven wishes to keep her out of the hunt that might prove lethal to all of them. So I'll start now. Start at the hotel room where Corisande and her maid and her chaperone are staying. Just do try not to cause a scandal, either of you, Mrs. Parslow added with well-studied hauteur. I must say, I sometimes think that you are taking the risks too lightly. Our good names are our major assets. There is a reason, after all, why your papa is what he is and does what he does under a pseudonym. You may do well to remember that. She turned towards her chamber door again. And now we should really retire. We have to look fresh in the morning. At that moment, Corisande felt her neck hair rise and stand. Her heart seemed to miss a beat as a freezing premonition came over her like a wave of icy water. Blackness grabbed her, devoured her, tore her apart from the world. She rose abruptly and turned towards the wall behind her, and then fell into a crumpled heap. A dark spot, no larger than a flower head, was forming on the rose-budded wallpaper, grew quickly into a black shadow shape which sprang from the wall, flew, roughly snake-shaped, across the room, and hit the opposite wall, where it diminished into a black spot again and vanished into nothing. From here I go on to chapter 9, where the two officers and one agent are trying to hunt the creature. And they have this difference of opinion about including the lady or not. Lieutenant Oscar von Orven had early breakfast sent to his room for himself and for Lieutenant von Guernsey. He did not want to face whatever crowd might be in the breakfast parlour that early. He did not want to face Mrs. Parslow, should she be about at this hour, or Delacroix, that's the agent. He did not feel like facing anybody just yet, Guernsey being the only unavoidable exception. There were dark rings under his eyes. He had not slept. There was a tiny knock. The door opened and Delacroix walked in. He looked somewhat haggard, his unruly dark hair badly in need of a comb, his collar half open, his necktie, as always, askew. He was still wearing his stained jacket. "So glad you are having a good and comfortable time, gentlemen," he grumbled, and both officers jumped up, momentarily forgetting that he was not their superior. If I might divert your attention from the indigenous cuisine to more pressing matters, we are in for another little hunt of the spectre. The wizard thinks it might materialize in the attic. Let us proceed. The two officers checked their pistols and hid them inside their coats. Von Guernsey pulled out a rosary and kissed it. Von Orven reached for the small porcelain receptacle for holy water by the door and crossed himself. Delacroix checked his left sleeve for an iron dagger and took up an iron case with a lock that had been deposited on the dresser. "Are we all set?" asked von Orven. "Are we ever?" countered von Guernsey. "Let's find it and catch it," said Delacroix. As if we had a chance, thought von Orven, and caught a meaningful glance from von Guernsey. They proceeded along the corridor to the grand staircase and upwards from there. On the floor above, they ran past the many narrow doors that led to the staff's rooms and those of the guests' servants. Delacroix produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door to the attic. "On we go." He took the lead. They sped up a narrow wooden staircase and found themselves right underneath the roof. The room was very long and narrow, probably as long as the entire building, but so low that the three men could stand upright in the middle, right underneath the gable. Delacroix turned round and hit his head painfully. He swore in a foreign language that his companions thought might be some kind of Italian, and which sounded thoroughly impressive. In the middle of this tirade, a shadow appeared in front of them and spread from a tiny black dot into a huge dark shape in only a few seconds. It did not have a recognizable face, but obviously looked directly at them. Unlike former encounters, it did not immediately look for a way out, but rather seemed to confront them quietly, waiting, lurking. "Uh-oh," said Udolf, finding the only word befitting the situation. The three gentlemen drew up their weapons. The spectre spread out thin, spreading and spreading, until they were no longer sure it was there. They looked about frantically. Was it still here? Or were the dark spaces among the rubble that was stored in this place merely normal shadows? They stood motionless, letting their gaze travel among old valises, zinc wash basins, dusty pieces of outmoded furniture, and other bric-a-brac. Delacroix took a cautious step forward. Lieutenant von Guernsey kept up. Lieutenant von Orven stayed back, thus turning their position into a kind of strategic triangle. "Let us spread out and look for it," Oscar whispered. "Spread out? How do you mean spread out?" Lieutenant von Guernsey whispered back. "It's done more spreading out than we will ever be able to do. It has probably sunk down to a cellar in the meantime and is having a ball there. We are none the wiser." "We need the little sweet miss to determine its whereabouts. She can feel its presence," said Delacroix, carefully poking his dark grey knife in the shadows. "The hell we do, Delacroix. Next time it will probably kill her." Lieutenant von Orven countered furiously, every sensibility offended. He was not going to allow that. He had given his word as a gentleman. "Nonsense." "How can you be so utterly devoid of any proper feeling?" "How can you lose all sense of what is necessary for a pair of blue eyes and a show of fashionable helplessness?" "How dare you!" "Gentlemen, could you please stop quarrelling in the middle of a campaign?" Udolf interrupted the discussion. "I am the chevalier here. It is entirely my part of the duty to do uncalled for things in the middle of fearsome danger." The other two glared at him. "Go get her," Delacroix ordered von Guernsey after a pause. Don't you dare to approach Miss Gerincourt, shouted von Alven. Oh, I won't, don't you fear, answered Udolf. I'll leave that pleasure to Delacroix. I have no wish to be eaten up by her chaperon for breakfast. The three men glared at one another. Behind Delacroix, the shadow drew itself together into a long, thin line, wriggling, snaking between the dusty pieces stored in the attic. Then it rose like a snake. Watch out, shouted Lieutenant von Alven. Delacroix turned. A shadow lance pierced his lower left arm, slithering into him with a sickening noise. He screamed. A circle of blood appeared on his sleeve and spread quickly. He fell to his knees, still screaming. In his other hand, he was still holding his dagger. He turned it around with flying fingers and then rammed it into his own shoulder, before the two officers beside him even knew what was happening. The screaming miraculously doubled, two voices coming from one mouth. Blood spouted from his shoulder and his arm, and black shadows oozed from it like boiling mud. Von Guernsey hit it with a rosary, and it wriggled away from the bleeding man. It spread thin again with a sizzling noise and amalgamated with the shadows in the attic. For a moment, it looked as if it sank through the ground. Go after it, gasped Delacroix. It's weakened. You might have a chance. Then he collapsed sideways, drawing in ragged breaths and biting his lips. The hell we do, said Lieutenant von Guernsey. Where would we go? For all we know, it might still be here. He knelt down beside Delacroix, trying to inspect the wounds, the knife still stuck in the colonel's shoulder. It had not gone into the hilt, but far enough to be thoroughly painful. We have to get out of here and do something about the bleeding. He tried to grab the dagger handle. Don't, intervened von Alven. We'll pull it out when we have some lint or bandages to stop the bleeding. Let's lift you up, sir. The two young officers helped Delacroix to his seat. He hissed through his teeth, sounding like a snake. Asco laid Delacroix's right arm across his shoulder and steadied him as much as possible. Udolf tried to support him from the left while holding his wounded arm. The three of them walked to the staircase, and from there it got tough. Step by painful step, the two young officers managed to move the tall and heavy man down by sheer determination. At the bottom of the stair, Delacroix nearly fell, his knees going weak. Although he fought with an iron will against increasing dizziness and the temptation to simply let go and sink into blackness, a trace of dark blood followed him. We have to get him somewhere quickly. He's losing a lot of blood, Asco said, painting for breath. That rules out taking him down to the office on the ground floor. Maybe Vonderbroek can do something. He needs a doctor, not a wizard. Are you sure about that? Delacroix's voice sounded strangely stretched when he intervened. Get me into one of the staff chambers. The pass key in my pocket should open any door. And don't talk about me as if I were not there. I'm not gone yet. Hold him for a moment, said Udolf, and hunted for the key in Delacroix's pockets, while Asco rammed his boots into the ground, trying to hold the wounded man, who, at 6'5", was almost a head taller than himself and seemed to grow heavier by the second. Here it is, cried von Guernsey, sped to the very next door to open it. At least knock, shouted von Alven, but it was already too late. The Chevalier had thrown the door wide, revealing a small dark room with a narrow bunk bed, next to which a dumbstruck, but nonetheless incredibly beautiful French maid was standing in frilly unmentionables, pulling up her black stockings. Nice, said Delacroix. Then he fainted. So, the next chapter will be chapter 25 with another hunt. They have now, von Oven believes, got rid of the young lady and her companions to another hotel. So they are trying to hunt the spectre again. Have we got a plan? Asked von Guernsey hopefully. No, we haven't, said Delacroix, handed him the cold iron case in which they were supposed to catch the spectre. You'd better take this, I'm somewhat handicapped by this shoulder. He held his knife in his right hand. I do not suppose we need to expect any guests here, with the Gerincourt party gone. We have the floor to ourselves, I believe. The three men crept along the corridor slowly, opening one door after the other and looking into the empty rooms. The men moved very slowly, Delacroix in the lead, Udolf holding the open case in one hand and a pistol in the other. He inspected the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. Oscar brought up the rear, watching with concentration for what might be coming from behind them, holding his pistol in his right and the possibly cold iron fruit knife in his left. Every shadow on the carpet, every trick of the sun shining in through the staircase windows, every speck on the silk-papered wall made him stop and scrutinize a possible opponent. God, cursed von Guernsey, don't let me shoot spiders and then be without ammunition when it comes. The others knew how he felt. They were afraid. None of them would ever have admitted it, though. Lieutenant von Orven hoped that the information the creature could only invade people with a magical background was correct. Lieutenant von Guernsey hoped that he had never had a magical encounter that he might not remember, for instance, after some heavy drinking. And Delacroix felt his stomach grow cold at the prospect of another assault. He could still feel the slithering iciness as it had invaded him, could still remember the knife entering his shoulder and the excruciating pain he had been in. He pushed those thoughts away from him. But the image of his nightmare, where a black ice sphere had encapsulated him and the dying young woman, came back to him unbidden. He almost dropped his knife when the scream came. It came from the rooms the Gerincourt party had held, the rooms they had thought empty. The door burst open, and with flying dress, Corisande Gerincourt emerged from that room, running like a hare. She sped down the corridor away from them. The three men started, shouting at once. What the? Cursed Osco. It's after it. Get it, screamed Delacroix. God damn it, shouted von Guernsey. It took them a moment to realize what was happening. All of them reacted the wrong way. Instead of charging into the direction from which the young woman had come, they ran after her to protect her. It only took them seconds to realize their mistake and to turn around and face the source of Miss Gerincourt's panic. These seconds had been vital. Like a slithering javelin, the creature shot out of the open door and towards the girl. In a daring jump, Lieutenant von Guernsey threw himself in its way, trying to stop it with the box, which he held open in an attempt to catch the opponent. However, the creature was far too big by now and too quick. Its momentum threw him backwards, head over heels, and he fell tumbling, rolling on the floor, unable to hold himself up. He felt the cold touch of vice encircle his throat as a snake might its prey. He dropped the box, grabbing with both hands for the creature that choked his windpipe, but his hand only found his own aching throat, the creature having gone already. He tried to roll over on his knees and get up, and doing that got in the way of Lieutenant von Oven, who, speeding towards the screaming young woman, stumbled over his companion and now fell headlong to the ground as well, losing his knife, firing off his unsecured pistol with the impact. He banged his head badly on a piece of furniture that stood against the wall. Delacroix bounded over both of them in one leap, holding onto his knife with extreme misgivings. He could see Corisande cowering at the far end of the corridor. She was on her knees, bent double with her hands in her neck, her elbows guarding her head. The shadow made her bright yellow dress look brown and patchy. It enveloped her as in a cocoon, hovering about her, slithering around her as if seeking a way in. She had stopped screaming but was shivering so violently that Delacroix could see it from some yards off, like a cluster of grey veils. Darkness stroked her trembling body, appearing to caress it in a sick, ugly passion. He saw wisps of these veils entering her dress, through her décolleté and up her legs. Snakes seemed to move under the yellow silk, creeping along her skin. She looked up at him now, her blue eyes wide with unfathomable terror, her face as white as death. A snake-like tentacle of darkness slithered across her face, trying to open her lips. Delacroix stood right in front of her, anticipating the impact of attack. "Leave her be," he said hoarsely, kneeling down and bending over the girl, his hand shaking with more than just resolve. "You don't want her, you want me, remember? I am the one you can take over." The shadow stopped its movement, solidifying as if into black glass. In a moment, the cowering girl became a jet black sculpture. She was enclosed in it, a glittering opaque crystal. He could see a black tear on her cheek, frozen in the middle of dropping from one eye. Delacroix screamed in frustration and lanced out with his cold iron knife. The girl suddenly melted into a human form again as the shadow parted, and Delacroix threw himself away from his own movement before the dagger could pierce the young woman before him. It hit the wall, cutting and scraping along the silk papering, only inches away from Corisande's jugular. He checked her skin with a glance, uncut. She moaned and gasped, cowering even lower under his weapon. Her white face looked up at him with huge, terror-ridden eyes. "Please," she panted, but he had no time for her, was looking frantically about himself to find out where the shadow had gone. It was still there. Wisps of darkness encircled them both now, preying, licking, stalking them. Facing away from her, he knelt before the girl, trying to shield her with his own body, his hand cutting the air around him in the desperate attempt to reach the creature which was never quite where he moved. It closed in slowly, and he crept backwards on his knee, pinning the girl between himself and the wall. He felt her shivering body against his back. She tried to move. Or was it the shadow creeping around him? Then it lanced out at him, snake-like again, pointed, deadly, aiming for his heart. He roared and cut at it with his knife, and it fainted like a fencing master. The scar over his heart seemed to flare with white fire, and he thought He could feel the magical amulet etch into his skin. He bellowed a curse, sweeping his knife around him, not totally sure whether the evil had already reached him or not. He saw Lieutenant von Orven dive at him with his ridiculous little penknife. The two dark blades nearly met in their swing, and the shadow reared up, spread thin, and suddenly seemed gone. The three men were looking around for signs of the spectre. At the moment, there was nothing. Colonel Delacroix, still on one knee, held his knife out in front of him, his eyes frantically scanning the surroundings. Lieutenant Oscar von Orven had jumped up again like a spring, brandishing his minute weapon. Lieutenant von Guernsey approached them after having taken possession of the box again, the empty box. Delacroix did not know whether he would be able to get up without his knees trembling. He felt the amulet burn on his chest, a little too hot to be comfortable, but cooling off now. He was not sure whether the danger was over by any means. He was not going to be surprised by a reappearing spirit that would come at them from nowhere. "My God, Delacroix," said Lieutenant von Guernsey admiringly, "you've got some nerve offering yourself to that creature. My compliments. I bow to your superior sang-froid." Von Orven was now kneeling too, trying to help the young woman who still cowered, huddled in a heap behind Delacroix. Sorry. "Are you all right, Miss Gerincourt?" he asked, stretching out his hands towards her. She cried out, and if at all possible, seemed to shrink even closer against the wall, away from him. "Hand the knife to von Guernsey," ordered Delacroix. "We don't want to threaten the lady further." Lieutenant Oscar von Orven blushed and did as he was told. And then he was at a loss what to do next. The petite woman nearly vanished behind the broadly built British officer. "Sir, if you were to move your he suggested. Delacroix concentrated and got up. He flexed his legs to stop them from trembling. He was still gazing around himself, as if expecting a renewed attack any moment. Lieutenant Oscar von Orven bowed down to the cloud of yellow silk in front of him. "If you will allow me, miss," he started, but did not receive an answer. "Oh, for God's sake, Orven, pick her up. She's in no fit state for polite conversation. That much I'm going to read today to you."